Podcast w zielonej Ukrainie. Bariery i szanse powojennej odbudowy. Zapraszam, Michał Sutowski. Podobnie jak poprzednio, nasz dzisiejszy odcinek to tak naprawdę In Green Ukraine, bo będziemy rozmawiać w języku angielskim. Hello everyone, this is the fourth episode of our podcast dedicated to the question of prospects and barriers for the green reconstruction, green recovery of Ukraine, a country at the moment defending itself from Russian military aggression. The whole series is supported by Warsaw office of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And my guest today is Maria Repko, Deputy Director of the Center for Economic Strategy and Ukrainian economists, speaking from Szczecin. Hello, Maria.
Hi.
Hi, and thanks for joining me here. I would like to ask with a question your money is not charity, it's an investment. This is what President Volodymyr Zelensky said during his speech in Washington, urging Congress of the United States to continue American support for Ukraine. I would like to ask if you see any of course, what he meant, he was, of course, speaking mostly in the context of the direct military support. But I would like to ask if you see any perspective for something akin to the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, and maybe even before some peace settlement can be reached. So is it possible to start reconstruction of Ukraine even before the war stops?
Yeah, thank you, Michał, for this question, and Dzień dobry, Poland. It's an honor to be here for me, and of course, I'm very grateful for all the support that your people are providing to Ukrainians. Talking about Marshall Plan and if it should be something oriented for a long-term green recovery or include some short-term already some developments which could be done now, I would probably suggest that it starts at the moment. And actually what I see is that many countries, they already see that Ukraine is, again, quoting our President Volodymyr Zelensky, alive and kicking, right? And it needs all the support it can get in the face of the huge, massive destruction of its energy infrastructure. So the recovery and rebuilding should start now. If we don't want Ukraine to be left with no electricity, no business, and no life in its territory. So this is the necessity. It's not the question of, I would say, design of a long-term policy or a choice or some, political negotiations. This is a necessity which should be done if the world community and Ukraine itself believes that it should survive, should stand.
But okay, if there is if there is war, if there are bombardments, if there is hostile artillery attacking the country, its infrastructure, as you mentioned. The question is how it is possible to, for example, attract people who'd like to, do you think in terms of attracting private investment, or what could be done to convince investors to go to Ukraine if it's during when it's under direct threat, when it's
during the war, right. This is a very good question. I would divide my answer to two parts, right? First part is energy sector, and here we could have both public and private investments, and anybody who can supply generators, supply small power stations, supply, green energy, and even not so green energy, everyone would be welcomed. But of course, the war is a huge factor if we are talking about probably investments which are oriented into the profit making, right? So that is why is it a good question? Because we need also a lot of anti-aircraft defense weapons. And this is also the huge question of Ukraine's reconstruction. I mean, you should not only think of reconstruction, but also on how to prevent the further destruction of the remaining assets and of the assets which are to be reconstructed and repaired and provide heat and power to Ukrainian people. So as an economist, I usually talk about budget, about monetary policy, and so on and so forth. But now, actually, every my speech, I talk about weapons, because this is something that could prevent destruction, that could make a recovery a less financial burden to taxpayers throughout the world, not only for Ukraine. And this is really important. And the second component here is not only the anti-aircraft missiles, but also some long-range missiles, because Russia now feels that it can do anything it wants, and some preventive actions, I think, should happen. So this is the first part. And another part on probably something more long-term and on investments, not only into the energy sector. Already Germany and US and other countries, they have the agreements with Ukraine on protecting on investment guarantees. These investment guarantees, even for the wartime, for example, could be enacted by MIGA, for example, which is the U.S. Investment Guarantee Agency, the Development Financial Corporation. This is also the U.S. agency. It has already guaranteed the loan portfolio for one of Ukrainian banks to small and medium enterprises. So again, this is all could be a part of the bigger Marshall Plan. This all depends on the effort of the global community, the public finances of our partner countries. But these efforts, they could actually bring leverage and attract more private money and not only public ones. So that's why insurance against war-related risks, against political risks, this is a very important topic. And I'm very glad that it is being discussed, and even some particular actions have already been taken.
So like the insurance of investments, I assume, is a important part of what can be done in terms of like creating conditions for future, for like the contemporary and future recovery and the reconstruction. Do you see any other like financial tools that, in your opinion, international community has or disposes, and should like use them in order to help Ukraine directly now or in the next months?
Maybe not directly now, but next month, probably, if some miracle happens, it is possible. And I'm now talking about Russian assets, about the seized assets of Russian oligarchs and the frozen Russian central bank assets. This money just lays on accounts in different Western banks, and there is no moral reason to not think about channeling it to support Ukraine now and reconstruct hospitals, reconstruct schools, and of course help Ukrainians to get energy and heating to their houses. What is needed is a legal solution. And as far as I know, Brussels is already trying to come up with such a legal solution. And not only a long term, which would demand like a lot of court proceedings and a lot of decisions and a lot of time, really a lot of time, but also some short-term solutions. Like, for example, recently Ursula von der Leyen said that there is an opportunity of investing this money and getting profits, and these profits could be then channeled to support of Ukraine. So Russian assets for us, it means that Russia pays actually the price, not European taxpayers, not US taxpayers, but the aggressor country, the country sponsor of terrorism. It pays the price, and Ukraine gets the funds it needs to stand up and to keep fighting.
Mm-hmm. And as for the like more long-term solutions, EU and as well as the US, I think they are trying somehow to use the crisis they faced in recent years, like pandemics, now inflation, as a sort of an opportunity for a systemic change. Like, for example, the US is planning to heavily invest in green technologies. The same for European Union with with the 455, Repower EU, and so on. My question is, do you think that the Ukrainian reconstruction could be made in a way that, do you think that there are like some positive prospects for that Ukrainian recovery, reconstruction would correspond with like modern challenges like the climate crisis? Do you think that those aims, like so to rebuild and to prepare the country, the state, the society for like more long-term challenges, that those aims can be combined, that you can do this together, so to say?
Yeah, you're talking about what we call Build Back Better. And these
Exactly.
3Bs, they of course envisage the climate action and reconstructing the facilities in a better and cleaner way. And Ukraine, as I do hope so, future member of the European Union, of course, will have the green reconstruction and actually the green agenda as a whole in its table, and it will think about it. But what I have to say here is that if we try to remember, like Warsaw probably was rebuilding itself after the war, or Dresden, how it was rebuilt for the first time, or the other cities which were destroyed. What was the pressing issue is to build a lot of housing, build a lot of infrastructural objects at as cheap price as possible, because the needs were huge. If Ukraine would face the lack of money, the lack of funding for the reconstruction, if Russian assets would not be seized in a proper way, if the West does not help Ukraine with sufficient financial flows or sufficient flow of projects which would be financing the reconstruction and rebuilding, then we will have a dilemma of like building that better, or allowing people to have the roof over their head, as it happened after the Second World War. For example, in Kiev, most of the residential buildings before the year 2010, it was so-called Khrushchevki, which were built during the Khrushchev reign. It was like a lot of time have passed since the war and since the post-war reconstruction, but still they didn't have enough money, and that's why they built cheap and affordable housing. And this would be the
this
dilemma.
means that, for example, the Khrushchevki, they had a very poor like thermal isolation. Am I right?
Yes, almost no thermal isolation at all, and probably a little bit better than those housing that was built during the 90s, but still it's a poor housing. And of course, the infrastructure is also poor and not thermal isolated, and it's outdated. So we would have a trade-off, right? Either build something cheap, but build it fast and make it accessible to people, or build something better, but it will be more expensive, and Ukrainians will not have sufficient money to afford this building. That's why if we will be talking about the Marshall Plan, we will have to be sure that there is enough funding. And for that, I would name one figure. Currently, before Russia started to attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure, the loss of physical assets, the loss of accumulated capital in the country was calculated as $4 billion per week. And it was only the destruction of housing, hospitals, schools, enterprises, roads, and so on and so forth. So for now with the energy infrastructure attacks, it's much more. And the amount of funds which would be needed, it would probably exceed $500 billion, because previously, before the energy infrastructure attacks, the World Bank estimated the needs at 250, if I'm not mistaken, billions. So now it would be more. And of course, we're not talking about 1 year. We are not probably talking even about the 3 years period horizon, maybe 5, 10, and further on. But still, these funds are huge. That's why it's important if Ukraine has it or not, and from it will depend if it would go green or if it will opt for something cheaper.
So this trade-off between, like, if there is a scarcity of resources, then this trade-off, of course, appears. But
Yes.
there is also the question of even more long-term like perspective. What I mean by that is that Ukraine has a huge potential to develop like green energy sources like the wind or the solar, due to its like geographical setting. Do you think that Ukraine could become like a part of this broader European, probably later within the Europe, as a member of the European Union, as a sort of a climate neutral Europe framework?
Ukraine has not only green energy, let's say, facilities or prerequisites. This is only Ukrainian south where the solar panels could be installed and work successfully. Ukraine has several nuclear power stations, which works at about 50% of their installed capacities. So it would be increased, and with the integration of Ukrainian energy networks with European NCE, we actually already have the opportunity to export electricity to European Union, and this electricity is cheap and I would say green nuclear power. Because I do believe, and this is my genuine belief, that nuclear energy is okay from the point of view of green development. What we also have, and what's important, for example, in Yuzivka, this is the area between Lugansk and Kharkiv in the eastern Ukraine. There is a gas field, natural gas field, Yuzivske Rodovishche, Yuzivka gas field, and it is not like underexplored. It has a huge gas deposits, natural gas deposits. It could be pretty easily extracted, and if we have like stable national border with Russia, and if investments come there and of course be insured in a proper way against all military risks, Ukraine can increase its gas extraction like enormously. And we already had, for example, Shell company, which was going there and exploring its options. And also Ukraine has gas in the Black Sea, coast. So this is the gas deposits. What Ukraine also has is the natural gas storage facilities, which are actually big, and how they were formed. It was the former gas deposits, which were just depleted, and then now it is used as a gas storage facilities. Europe doesn't have that, so this is also important, and this is also good. I mean, Ukraine, of course, can be part of European energy security architecture, as it can be the part of European defense security architecture, and this is important, and this is what we aim for.
Mm-hmm. There is also always this dilemma when reforming a country, whether the state should be an influential actor or maybe not necessarily. This was especially the framework how we talked and thought about reforms in the 90s, in the like early years of the 21st century, which had something to do with like those neoliberal mindset. But interesting thing you said at the Polish Batory Foundation a few months ago. You gave an example of Ukrainian railways as the public institution that was actually before the war was perceived as very quite dysfunctional or even corrupt, but now is like doing a great job as an institution, as a facility, as an instrument, like to transport people, to evacuate them, to sustain the economies, sustain the war effort. So my question is that how do you see this experience of war will like affect this question of how much state versus how much private actors will be like taking part in the process of recovery and reconstruction?
Let me thank you, because Ukrzaliznytsia, Ukrainian railways, is a source of a huge inspiration for all of us during these months. It managed to transform enormously, and it showed I would say huge level of adaptability and the willingness to support its country and, on every level of management and on the level of ordinary people who just greet Ukrainians when they come, for example, from Poland or when they go abroad. What is important if we are talking about state-owned enterprises in Ukraine is that European and American actors should probably still pay attention to corporate governance in these enterprises, because the corporate governance reform, which was conducted since I think 2016 to 2021, actually it was like ongoing. It was a pretty successful reform, and if we don't have a rollback on that, if we do have proper supervisory boards with the independent members on these boards and with top-level professionals, Ukrainian state-owned enterprises can actually be pretty successful. And the case of Ukrzaliznytsia, as well as the case of Ukrainian Post, Ukrposhta, they show it. What is, however, important as well is that during this war, we see that the effect of decentralization and a lot of, distributed capacities for whatever, for business, for retail trade, for energy generation, for anything, is a source of resilience. Because if you have like something which has a monopoly position and which is pretty big, so you have something big to lose. And if you have it distributed and decentralized, it gives additional strength, additional resilience. So that's why probably it is important that Ukraine starts to provide better anti-monopoly policy in all the areas which could be imagined.
Great. Thank you very much, Maria. Maria Repko was my guest, an Ukrainian economist, deputy director of the Center for Economic Strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you, everyone.
This was the 4th episode of our podcast, supported by Heinrich Böll Stiftung in Warsaw. My name is Michał Słotowski, and you can listen to our podcast on the website www.krytykapolityczna.pl/podcast, as well as on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcast. Thank you very much.